she's going to share a little bit about her sort of journey into lighting and some of the projects she's worked on. And then we can do some questions afterwards. And this time me and Martin are going to sit on the sofa so she's not lonely.
Thank you. Thank you. So hi everyone, my name is Briony and I'm here to talk about performance lighting, but actually specifically what I'm here to talk about is theatre lighting, which is what I know about best and it's what I absolutely love. So I discovered Theatre Festival when I was at university, and I went to the University of Glasgow, and I was studying something nothing to do with theatre at all. I was doing French and German, and one of my friends in my first year in Halls of Residence, Ruth was really into acting and she absolutely loved it, and she joined the Student Theatre Society and made lots of friends, and then I joined as well and made a lot of friends, but acting for me was not something I wanted to do at all, and talking to an audience or performing to an audience was not something that I ever thought I would ever want to do, which is quite fun. But I started off by helping out with the set, and so we'd build the set and I quite enjoyed painting it. I enjoyed the artistic nature of that and did a bit of helping out with stage management, and then as the shows got a little bit bigger we moved into a theatre, and then we actually had some real equipment to learn with and play with. And the theatre at the University of Glasgow was called the Gilmour Hill G12, and it was actually an old church, and you had the stage on the bottom, and then above our heads we had this tension wire grid that we could walk on, and there were bars everywhere so you could put lights wherever you wanted. And there wasn't a lot of equipment and it was all quite simple, but there were mostly three different types of lights, and there were like 20 of each or something. And so first of all there were parkans, and these parkans are these really sort of round shaped beams of light, really soft. You can't do a lot with them except for pointing them where you want them to be, and the edge of the beam is really soft and gentle and diffuses quite nicely. And if you want a smaller beam you might want to put it closer to the stage, and if you want a bigger beam you want to pull it further away from the stage. Then there were some Fresnels. Now you can do a little bit more with a Fresnel. A Fresnel has a different type of lens, so it has this particular glass lens, and you could make the beam small if you wanted it to be small and spot it down, and you can make the beam bigger as well if you wanted the beam to be bigger. And then after that, if you didn't really want areas of the light to be on the audience, for example, or in the wings or something like that, you had these flaps which are called barn doors, and then you could bring these external bits of metal in and focus the light into a box, for example. And then finally, the final type of light that they had was called a profile. And the profile offers you the most amount of control over the light. So once again, it's a circular beam, but this time the circular beam can be quite sharp. And what I mean by sharp is that the bit where you have the light is perfectly lit, and then the bit where the darkness is completely dark, and the line in between the two is this completely razor sharp line. And you can control that again by bringing in shutters, and you can make a box or a square, and this was basically all we had to play with. So we just learnt by doing, mostly making it up as we were going along and discovering what we liked to use. We then had to decide where we put the lights, and that was quite interesting because none of us had any formal training, and there was a technical manager there who gave us some sort of vague pointers, but really we just discovered as we were going along. And so this is a show here on the picture called Leonce and Lena that was one of the shows I did when I was a student, and what I had intended in this moment was to have this spotlight, which is a profile on the performer, and the performer was this menacing character in the story, and I think he was a robber or something like that. He didn't say much, and what I wanted was to have this light in front of him, this tight spotlight in a box. But then there was a bit of an accident and a bit of miscommunication between where I put the light and where he ended up standing, and then created this lovely wonderful accident of creating this beam of light that was actually ended up being behind him, and we had this lovely light on his head and on his shoulders and absolutely no light under his hood on his face, and I really liked that. And so that's when I started to discover that it matters where the light is, but it also matters where the shadows are. And then we carried on and discovered extra things like colour. And colour was and is my absolute favourite, because then we had a whole box of these things called filters, this gel, and you could suddenly change the colour of the lights, because up until then they were all white, but if you wanted them to be a different colour you had to choose what that was and you had to put that in yourself. And I just completely went wild, and every different scene in every show was a different colour, and it went from green to blue to pink and green at the same time on different sides. And on the left hand side it was this dance piece where I think the technical manager probably suggested maybe you should try lights from the sides, and I thought, oh, okay. And so we have different coloured lights coming in from the sides, and that made them look really, really strong and really accentuated their muscles and their body. And then the picture on the right hand side, we have these singers and backing singers at the top in white, in glittery costumes, and then the performers at the front in deep blue. And I think this colour was a blue colour called Congo blue that I really liked and I used a lot back then. And so I carried on doing this as a student. And then one day, I think I was probably my final year at this point, my 4th year at university, I went to see this show called Hey Girl. And Hey Girl was a show by an Italian director called Romeo Castellucci. And it was, I mean, I can't even begin to explain how completely different it was to anything I'd ever seen before. So first of all, at the beginning of the show, there was this table at the front of the stage and there was a light above it and there wasn't a lot happening. And then little by little we realised that actually this mass that was on the table was moving, and there were bits that were dripping off it and falling it onto the floor. And I don't really know what they were, but I think it was probably something like wax or maybe silicone, and these just blobs of liquidy thick something was just slowly falling and melting and falling onto the floor, which then started to reveal something that looked like body parts, like pieces of mannequins chopped up. And then the pieces of the mannequins started to fall to the floor. And then we started to see there was actually a body underneath and there was a performance. We could see an arm and we could see a back and a head, and they started to move. And as they started to move, these bits of mannequin of whatever they were, silicone mouldings, started to fall to the floor as well, and then revealed this performer underneath. And then that's it, the show started with this performer standing up and then getting dressed. And the show was completely wild. It had everything in it, every single technical element that I didn't even know existed was in this show. You had this laser that was pointing around the stage and then suddenly hit the performer in the head. And then there was this sword which she has here, and I have no idea how they did this, but they plugged it into, I don't know, mains electricity or stuck it on a heat pad, and so this sword completely heated up, and then she got this lipstick and she stuck this lipstick on the sword and it started to fizz and it smelt horrible, and you could see the smoke everywhere. And then there were these other bits like these circular panels of glass that just exploded everywhere, and then suddenly there was glass all over the floor as well, and she was barefoot, and it was just completely mad and wild, and to be honest, not enjoyable at all. But the experience was just like nothing I'd ever seen before, and I remember thinking, oh, this is like a thing that people do, like a job, like a career. And I remember thinking, this is extraordinary. I don't know anything about this, but I want to give this a go. I want to do this. And so I was finishing my degree in French and German, and I didn't really know what to do next. And I really liked the idea of doing a technical theatre course, but I'd just done 4 years at university and I couldn't really afford to go back and do another however many years doing this course. So what I did instead was to reach out to different people in Scotland where I lived, and I remember emailing the technical director at the National Theatre of Scotland, and just said something really simple like, oh, hello, my name's Briony, this is my story, I'd like to learn more. Would you have time to meet me for a cup of tea, and maybe we could go and chat about this and you might have some advice. And he was so lovely, so enthusiastic, and said, yes, of course, come over. And so we had a chat. And then he told me about this project that he was starting, which was he was about to launch an apprenticeship at the National Theatre of Scotland. And I applied for this apprenticeship and I got in. And so I was the first apprentice, technical apprentice at the National Theatre of Scotland. And the goal was for me to spend, it was over 10 months, and it was for me to spend a bit of time with all of the technical departments. And I was going to be with video and sound and costume and stage management and lighting, of course. And I was really lucky because the very first week I got assigned to the lighting team. And then I actually spent the whole 10 months in lighting, and I never did anything else because I just loved it so much, and I just worked on lighting on all of the shows. And one of the shows, the very first one that I did, was this show called Transform Orkney. So this wasn't so much a performance, but it was an art installation in this disused warehouse on the Isle of Orkney. And the lighting designer was this woman called Lizzie Powell. And so what we were doing was we were there for about 2 weeks setting it all up. And we created this project with the people of Orkney. And we had different local artists and different people that sort of were telling us these stories. And so around the warehouse, we had all these little different zones. And you can see this pillar with some pictures in it and this blue light at the back. And we had a bit of video. And every single little area had a very small little simple vignette telling a story. And lighting was a big part of that, because once we turned all the working lights off, lighting really created the mood and enhanced the story. And I've got two little photos of two little things. So on the left-hand side, we've got this green picture, and the black figure at the top that's quite tricky to make out is actually a tap. And so we attached the tap to the wall, and we plumbed it in with a hole through the wall and a tank and some water and a pump at the back. And we set it up so that drips of water were falling out of this tap really slowly into a tank below that had water in it. And then below that tank there was a plinth, and underneath the plinth there was a floodlight that we'd coloured in this sort of bluey, seagrassy green colour gel. And so the effect was really quite simple, that as people were all walking along and walked past it, these drops of water would fall down and create these beautiful ripples on the wall. And it was really serene and peaceful, and a lot of people just stood there and watched for a bit and then moved on to something else. And I really liked that in particular, because it was just so small and so beautiful and so lovely, and just this tiny little story on its own, and it was really enjoyable. And then on the right hand side, so I was my job on that event was to be the lighting technician, and it was the first thing I'd ever really done in a professional environment. And one of the things that I needed to do was create these light boxes. A local artist had created this artwork that was printed onto vinyl that was going to go on the front of the light box, but first of all I had to wire up the light box so that there was light that could come through. And we did that using fluorescent tubes, and I'd never done any wiring before. I'd never wired a plug, so the technical manager sort of taught me how to do that, taught me how to strip back the cable and how to wire it all up so that they all worked together like this. And I was so proud of that. I was really pleased with myself, because I'd never done anything, to the point where I took photos of the light box and the tubes, but I actually never took a photo of the final product, which is unfortunate. But this was the bit that I was proud of, so this is what I'm showing you here. And that was the start of my apprenticeship, and so I was there for about 10 months. And then the very last show that I did was this show called Peter Pan. And Peter Pan was a completely different show on a completely different scale. It was absolutely enormous. The set was big. The set of Peter Pan was this bridge in Scotland called the Forth Rail Bridge, and you can see elements of it there behind them. And then it sort of would be this really big diagonal bridge across the stage, but then each section revolved independently as well. And then you could cover it up with this pirate sail to become the Jolly Roger on the left-hand side. And it was just so big. There were lights everywhere. There were bars and bars and bars of lights above our heads. These were moving lights, and there were ladders on the right and on the left. Each ladder, there was something like 5 ladders on the right wing, 5 ladders on the left-hand wing, and each ladder had 3 rungs with a moving light on each one. And it was just overwhelmingly enormous, but fun and thrilling and exciting at the same time. And this was a tour as well, so we had to do all of this in each venue. We had to put it all up. We went to different venues around Scotland, London and the Barbican, and we had to do all of that. And my job on this show was to be the follow spot operator, and I really enjoyed that. So, because suddenly I was doing a real job and a real professional show, and I had my own role and I had my own responsibility. And so in every venue there would be another follow spot operator who'd be doing it with me, but they would be someone from that venue, so I would have to teach them what to do and how to do it. And I really remember, and this is really funny, I remember that being the first role that I did, that when I explained to my dad what I was doing, he actually understood what I meant. So up until then I'd done all of these different shows and talked to him about it, and he never really fully grasped what I was doing. But suddenly when I was operating the follow spot and he could visualize that, and he could visualize me holding this piece of equipment and moving it around and the light moving around on the people, then he got it. So that was quite funny, because I was like, of all these things I've done, this is the thing that you're now going to remember. But that was really good, and I really liked that show. And then my apprenticeship came to an end. And I thought, well, this was quite good. I enjoyed it. I'd really like to carry on doing this as a career. So then I looked at other jobs, and I applied for a job with Scottish Opera, and I got the job as well, and that was really exciting. So I joined Scottish Opera, and this was opera now, so it had a different element to it. It had a live orchestra, and it had the singers, and I really felt like, in terms of what I enjoyed artistically, there was this additional level to it again that was fantastic. And the very, very first show that we did was a show called The Marriage of Figaro. And for me, this was the perfect introduction to opera. The music was really beautiful. I loved the music. It was really, really lovely and easy to listen to. And the set was stunning. We had all these lovely colours. The costume design was absolutely beautiful. And I loved the lighting design as well. And slightly different to theatre, I felt that the lighting design in this opera in particular was really bold and bright, and you had these enormous lights, these Fresnels, much, much bigger than anything I'd used at university, above the set, just completely flooding the set with all of this light. And behind the set, and you can see through the windows there, we had something called a cyc. And a cyc is a white cloth, just like the projection screen that I have above my head actually. And what you do is that you want to change the colour of it. Here it's representing the sky behind us, and you want it to be blue, so it's lit in blue with these blue floodlights. But then you just don't want it to be one colour, you want it to have a bit of texture to it and a bit of movement as well. So then on top of the cyc, we had these profiles, which are the lights with all the control that I mentioned, projecting onto that as well, but we wanted it to look like clouds. So what we had was these things called a gobo, and a gobo is a little metal disc, and from that metal disc you cut out a hole in the shape of a cloud, and you can buy it pre-made or you can make it yourself, and then you put it inside the light. So then the light that comes out the front, the beam that comes out the front, is in the shape of a cloud now. And so we would pop them on the cyc, mix the white clouds into the blue floodlight, and create this lovely texture. And it was really, I really enjoyed all of that. And so here in this picture we've got it again, but it's nighttime, and so you can tell that because we've got the low level lighting on the performers, and the cyc is a bit of a darker blue. So now we're starting to think, okay, it's getting dark, it's early evening. And this was something that was really lovely about opera, because all of these things were happening. Here we might imagine there might be a candle or something lighting the performers, but we can't see it. And so all of the equipment that's used to light the performers is hidden, and you can't see it. And here we've got the cyc that's back again, but full width, and there's different colours. And so we'd have a row of floods at the top in this darker blue, and then we'd have a row of floods at the bottom that would be in a pink colour, and then they merge and blend in the middle beautifully, creating this illusion of sunset. With them dancing at the wedding. And opera was fantastic. I really enjoyed opera. And here we've got a cornfield behind as well. So now we've got this additional impression of the sky being 100 miles away or 1,000,000 miles away or wherever. And with the perspective, it sort of blends away into the distance. And opera was fantastic. I really liked it. And so this was the first opera I did. And then I was there for the whole season. And I think there was something like 5 operas in total. And we toured around Scotland and sometimes to England as well. And then I came to the end of the opera season. And so at this point I started to think, well, what do I want to do now? And then there was a job advertised at the National Theatre, a lighting technician job. And I thought, well, I don't know, I might not get it, but I'll give it a go. And so I applied for the job, but I didn't get the job. And so I went through this long interview process with lots and lots of technical questions, and I didn't get the job at the end. And then a few days later, when someone called me up to tell me that, they said a couple of things. First of all, they said, well, the reason that you didn't get the job is because we felt that your technical knowledge wasn't strong enough, particularly with regards to moving lights. And then they also said, but actually we've got a few smaller roles coming up, and smaller in terms of not permanent, so like a 3-month contract, a 4-month contract. And if you're interested, we might get you in for one of those. And I just remember thinking, oh, that's really nice, but you're probably just saying that to everyone. And I wasn't really expecting anyone to call me back at all. But they did, and they did call me back. So then I left Glasgow and I left Scotland and I went down to London, and I started working at the National Theatre, and that was really exciting. And this was a 3-month contract, and so it was very, very clear to me. I mean, they would be really supportive informative and really helpful about why I didn't get the full-time job. So I thought, great, so this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to spend all of my time focusing on moving lights. I'm going to do all of the training that they have to offer, and I'm going to learn all about it. And so I spent a lot of time learning servicing, learning maintenance, so that next time a job came up, I would be there and I'd be ready, and I wouldn't get the same feedback at the very least. And then another job did come up, and then I did get it, and so I was there for about 9 years in the end. But one of the first shows that I remember working on was this show called Mr. Man, and this was a one-man show set in a warehouse. And it really stood in my mind because the show was set in a warehouse. The whole stage was designed, and that's what you can see here as if we were sitting in the front row. You can see the set looks like this old disused warehouse. But unlike opera, and unlike what I'd done before, all of the lighting that was lighting the performer, or at least the vast majority of it, you could actually see on the stage. So we have these rows and rows of fluorescent tubes, and some of them were wonky, and some of them were deliberately broken, so they looked a bit more natural. And it meant that suddenly it looked like the light that you can see on stage is the light that's lighting the performer in this picture. Now in reality, there were all of the traditional lights hidden away in the wings above head, and you can see actually that there's this lovely shadow of this performer on the back wall on that shutter, and so you know that there is actually more to it than just the fluorescent lights to enhance it, but you really get that illusion that the lighting is the lighting that you can see on stage. And then there were other elements as well, and I really liked it because they were unconventional. So then the three brighter circles of light that you can see on the right, they're what I would call like Cooley lampshades, so these big giant metal lampshades like this that are circular, and rather than hanging, they were just sat on the floor, on their side, on a shelf. And then there was also, I don't know if you can see, there's a little staircase in the middle, and to the right of the staircase there are these funny little crosses that look like a bit of a sort of spooky cemetery, and these were fluorescent tubes again that lit up and looked really nice. And then there was a scene where in the show where in the story there was a power cut, and then the performer connects I don't know what to be honest, maybe in the story a battery, but he connects this festoon of lights, this light bulb garland to this battery, and then suddenly that's the only thing that's lighting him as well, and there was like white and yellow and red light bulbs. And my job on this show was to be the lighting operator. So this time I was sitting at the back of the auditorium on the lighting console, and all of the lighting states and the lighting cues have been recorded in advance. So I was just then operating them when it was time to go to the next lighting state. I was doing that. And I remember one of my absolute favourite bits of the show, which sadly I don't have a picture, was at the very end, after the curtain call, there was a blackout, and then the house lights would come up. And then a second later, on the right-hand wall of the stage, there was this enormous sodium floodlight, and so the sodium floodlight would strike, and it would start off in this really sort of deep ambery orangey colour, and little by little over the next minute or minute and a half it would start warming up, and it would start changing colour, and it would go from this deep orange to this sort of medium orange to this brighter yellow to this really bright colour. And a lot of the audience sort of noticed that as well, because even though this was the post set, and in theory that's when you're getting your coat and your bag and you're leaving, there was actually still something happening on stage. And I remember they would often get up and then go, oh, but something's changed, what's happening here? And then they'd sit back down again, which was really lovely because they were enjoying it in the same way I was enjoying it. But it was also a little bit annoying because at this point, when it's 11 o'clock at night, you just want everybody to go home, and you want to go home as well because it's been a long day. But it was really good fun. And then after that, there were some different shows, and I remember one in particular was this big musical called The Light Princess. And The Light Princess was the first musical I'd ever done, and it wasn't disappointing. It had all of the things that you want a big musical to have. And the storyline was that there were these two kingdoms at war or something, and there was the kingdom of Lagobel, and that's who we can see here, and their kingdom was all about gold and warmth and orangey, reddy, warm tones. And so whenever they were on stage, and they were usually on the stage right side of the stage, the lighting would always be really dark, saturated red colours from the top and from the back, and these beautiful warm colours from the front, and it was really sort of striking. But then to oppose with that, there was this other kingdom called Sealand, and the Sealanders were all about the ocean and coldness and blues, and so whenever they were on on stage, the light was always really rich and blue, and it was also quite cold. And you can see the prince on the left, Prince Digby, was the prince of the Sealand Kingdom. And then there was the forest scene, and then in the forest scene everything was green, and then everything was on this show. There was smoke, there was haze, there was fog, which you can see rolling around at the bottom of the feet of the performer, and there was a confetti drop, and every single piece of scenery that was in the show lit up. There was LED tape everywhere, everything changed colour, every object that anybody had a light in it. And my job on this show was those big pink flowers that you can see at the top. And so what we wanted for those big pink flowers was for them to light up. And they were to be lit up, or at least the edge of them was to light up using this product called EL wire, which stands for electroluminescent wire. And it's a bit like a flexible, if you were to imagine a glow stick that glows, but then it's a flexible wire at the same time. And then we would put that on the flowers, but we didn't really know how to do it, and we tried gluing it on and it didn't work at all. And we tried different types of staple guns to staple it on, and it didn't work. And then I came up with the idea that maybe we could sew it on and stitch it on. And so I spent days and days and days sewing this wire onto these flowers, and they came on at the end for the last number, and they were just so beautiful, and I was just really proud of that. And that was my bit on that show. And then I moved to a different theatre, but still within the National Theatre, in the Olivier Theatre. And this was the very last show that I worked on, because by the time I was working on this show, I was pregnant. And so I was 8 months pregnant when we did this show. And I just really loved it. It was a trilogy of plays by Chekhov. And all of them were really, the lighting in this, unlike the lighting in the two previous shows I've just talked about, was really naturalistic. And so if someone's outside, it needs to look like they're outside. And if it's sunny, it needs to look like it's sunny. And if it's nighttime, it needs to look like it's nighttime, etc., etc. It needs to be natural and represent what's going on in the story, what time of year it is, and where they are. And so, for example, here we've got a picture of this performer standing outside, and we know it's nighttime because there's the trees behind her, and they're lit sort of in a blue colour at low levels, and the house behind her, the lights are on. And she's got this little oil lamp on the table, and she is lit in a white colour, and that's important because you do need to sort of suspend your disbelief. So yes, it's nighttime and it needs to look like it's nighttime, but also we need to be able to see the performer, we need to be able to see their emotion and their facial expressions. So she was lit like that. And then we would have, in this scene, we have another cyc. So the big white circle at the back is another cyc. And behind that cyc there was this enormous contraption, which was this really big circular metal structure that had lots of little lights in it. And that was pushed right up against the back of the cyc, and that represented the sun. And that's quite low. So we know that this is a summer's evening, the colour is warm, the light is all quite low, and we've got the sun at the back, and I just thought it was really beautiful. Whereas in contrast to that, we have this other scene, and I think this was in the Seagull, where the performer comes in at the end, and it's raining, and it was raining on the stage for real. And so when she walked through the rain, she got wet, and this is her stood outside, outdoors, getting wet. But then another character lets her inside the house, and so here she sat with him inside the house, and there's no scenery around them, but we know they've come indoors, and there's this sort of warm box, white box on the floor that shows, okay, this is where they are indoors, and they're lit in this section, but actually behind them, as if it was through a window, you can still see the rain's pouring, and it's nighttime outside. And that was the last show that I did at the National Theatre. On a play, and so my role on this show was to be what we called their second programmer, and I really enjoyed that. And so what that means is you've got your lighting designer working with the main programmer, and they're creating the lighting. So the lighting designer might be saying, okay, so in this scene I'd like you to grab this light, and I'd like you to point it down here, and I'd like you to make it this colour, and I'd like you to do all these things. But meanwhile, we've got 3 shows to get ready for, and there's a whole team of lighting people doing all these other bits and pieces and getting these other bits ready. So it was my job to talk to them and be in contact with them. And when they had had something for the next scene that was coming up and they might want to check that it was in the right place, I would have to wheel that light up for them. Or maybe I would have to prepare all of the paperwork, because these shows would be on, let's say on a Tuesday, but on a Wednesday there'd be a show that we did a few months ago that would come back, and so we'd have to take everything away and put this second show, and then a few days later this show would be back, and so we'd have to put all the lighting back in the same place, and it needs to look exactly like the lighting designer intended it to look. So there was a lot of paperwork attached to that, and a lot of organisation, and I really enjoyed that. And then I went on maternity leave, and then I came back from maternity leave, and just before I came back there was this job that was advertised also at the National Theatre, and it was a part-time job, and that was perfect for me. I was really wanted to get that job, and I applied for it, and I was really lucky and I got that job. And that was in a different team, still within lighting at the National Theatre, but that was a team called Lighting Resources. And so the Lighting Resources team do different things. On the one hand, they look after all of the lighting equipment, so this is a bit more sort of a technical role with the equipment, and it's a bit like an internal hire shop for the National Theatre. They also look after the corporate spaces, so there's lots of corporate spaces that you can hire, and lighting plays a big part of that. The development department would organise a lot of fundraisers, and that was always fantastic, because they'd say things like, okay, so now we're going to have this fundraiser and we want it to look like the forest in Midsummer Night's Dream, and so we'd have to make that happen. Or it would need to look like a circus with lots of bold primary colours, and we need to make that happen. But then the thing that was my favourite was working with the learning department. And the learning department ran this course called Young Technicians. And Young Technicians was aimed at 14 to 18-year-olds, and it ran over on a Wednesday night over something like 10 weeks or something like that. And every evening they'd spend time with different technical departments, with lighting or with sound or video or staging, and I ran the lighting section. And I really liked that, because then what I was doing with them was basically going back to the beginning of what I was doing at university, learning about the different types of lights. So here in this picture, the person at the front is holding a profile, and they're learning how to focus a profile. And then also, you know, I mean, we did a bit of everything, but here we've got them with a par can as well, which was one of the other lights that I mentioned. And the person on the left here is putting some gel in front of it. And I just loved it. So we'd explore the different lights together. And then we'd explore, you know, what the lights did and where do you want to put them and what does it look like. So I would ask them questions like, okay, so, you know, you've put this light here, have a look at it. Now tell me where the light is. And then they talk about where the light was on someone's face, for example. And they say, okay, great, now tell me where the shadows are, because that's also really important. And so they'd explore where the shadows are and what mood does that create. And then I'd give them little... a box of gel and colour, and I give them these little tasks like, okay, can you find a gel that you put in front of the light that makes you feel like sunlight? And can you find a gel that you might put in the light that makes you feel like the kind of light you might have in a kitchen? And then it just got a bit wild. I was like, make it look like you're in a volcano, or make it look like you're underwater. And they always really enjoyed those sort of more creative tasks. And then at the end they had a big project where they would have to create their own lighting design, and they'd have to have different cues, so the lighting would have to change. And I remember one in particular where they were really passionate and really went for it, and they made it look like the poster from Stranger Things, and they were really into that. That was really good fun. And then after that, I thought, okay, well, I think it's time to just think about doing something different and maybe like a new challenge. And that's when I left the National Theatre. And a friend of mine had seen this job advertised on this website called Ambersphere Solutions. And I remember the advert really well, because it just said something really simple like, are you an expert in theatre lighting? If so, please email Glyn. And that's basically all it said. And I think there was a mention that it would be a sales role, but it didn't say much more than that. And I remember thinking, okay, well, I don't know a lot about sales, but I absolutely do know about lighting in theatre, so I'll give it a go. So I went for a job interview there, and I got the job, and that's where I work now. And that was about 2.5 years ago, which was fantastic, but it was also March 2.5 years ago, which was really difficult, because then I just got this new job, I was really excited, and then suddenly the pandemic happened. And that meant that I spent a lot of time on Zoom or on Teams talking to all of my colleagues that I'd never even met in person yet, because it really was my first day, was the beginning of the lockdown. But then as things eased, I was able to go back into the office and things like that, and then I was able to actually get involved with the equipment that I would be selling. And so my boss and I would spend hours and hours and hours with all of the lights, taking them apart, looking at what they are they made of, what do they do, what are they for. And so on the left here we've got a light where we'd actually taken a whole chunk of the light out and sections out so that we could really look at the light inside, and we filled the room with haze so we can see the path of the light and what's happening. Look, at this point it's white, at this point it's pink. And on the right hand side we dismantled something else as well, just to sort of explore what it looks like on the inside. And then once I felt confident with the lights that I was selling and sort of supporting, then we started to actually share them with people on the outside. And we did that by doing presentations on Zoom. And that at the beginning was terrifying because I was basically by myself in this room with these lights. My colleague Tom was next to me on the lighting console, but he wasn't on camera. And my colleague Lee was at front of me, and he was sort of managing all the sort of admin side of Zoom and questions and chats and that kind of thing. And then I just run through all of these lights and talk through them to different people. And I remember the first one I did was for the lighting team at the Royal Court Theatre in London. And I was just so incredibly nervous. But it was okay. It was sort of controlled, and I knew what I was saying, and I knew what I was doing, and I survived. And I was also ultimately in this real sort of controlled environment where it was the same every time, and I did my bit without any interruptions, and I learned that, and I was okay. But then as the industry started to open up again and presentations in front of people, in rooms with people became allowed again, one of the very, very first opportunities that came up was this open day organised by the Royal Opera House. And so I went from this really tight, controlled environment where I felt safe and I felt like I knew everyone, to suddenly standing all by myself on the stage at the Royal Opera House. And that was wonderful and completely scary all at the same time. And so this is me on the stage in the middle, and I can't remember what I'm talking about at this point, but I'm sort of presenting some of the different lights. And then on the left-hand side, you can start to see the beginning of the auditorium, and the auditorium was full of people. And it was just this... I never thought I'd ever do anything like that, but it was really fun. I really enjoyed it, and presenting was something that I really like to do, because I just get to share why I like these lights, what I like about these lights, and what they're for with people who don't know about them yet. And then a little bit after that, things opened up again and trade shows started again. And so then this was something that I discovered all over again, because I'd never done that. And so here I would stand, this was my little booth at one of the trade shows in London called ABTT. And I would stand there and clients would come along, and it was different all over again, because now we were having these small intimate conversations with people about the lights, where I could stand and point and show them the bits that I wanted to show them. But it was really nice to catch up, and it was really nice to see people after that. And then the final thing about my job that I love above everything else, I think, is when someone from a theatre or a lighting designer might have a project, and they'll have this project and they might say, okay, well, this is what we want to do. We're not really sure how to do it. Do you think you can help us? And do you think you might have something that could work for us? And so this is when I'd get involved at the very, very beginning, in the earliest stages, before the show's made, before it's rehearsed. And this was at the Royal Opera House again, and the lighting designer Lucy Carter wanted this light. She wanted this really, really big, enormous light, a profile called Huracan, to cast this enormous circle of light on stage. And you can see it's at the sort of top right of the image, so it's upstage left in the wings, pointing to the opposite side of the stage. But also it was on a sort of train track. So then the idea was that throughout the piece it would track from one side of the stage to the other, and as it was tracking, at this point it's diagonally across the stage, as it was tracking it would pan. So then when it was in the middle of the stage it would be pointing down the middle, and then when it was on the other side of the stage it had panned again, and then it would be pointing diagonally to the other side. And the idea was that the shadow of the piece of scenery and the shadows of the dancers would basically track round a bit like the sun. And that's the kind of project that I like getting involved in, because in these projects, and like this one here, I get to use all of my knowledge and all of my experience and all of the everything that I've learnt from working in different theatres over the years into understanding what people need and what people want to do with their shows now. And this was a different one where the designer wanted these tiny little light bulbs to be in these little paper lanterns. and it was important that they were really small, and so we spent a little bit of time in the workshop exploring with these different types of paper lanterns, and where does the light go, and if the light sits here, where is the shadow. But they also needed to be able to go up and down individually and change colour individually as well, and this is the end result on the stage, which I thought looked really, really nice. And so yeah, this is basically what I do now, and this is how I've ended up working in sales, but still working in theatre, lighting in theatre, and I absolutely love it. So thank you.
You're not on. I'm not.
Hello. You completely nailed putting across your enthusiasm
good.
for light. I don't think anyone could say you didn't do that. I can't see anyone in the audience, but if anybody
I'll step
has
out the light
some
and have a look.
questions, it would please don't be shy and ask a question. There was a couple of things I was gonna ask you, but you sort of answered them. One of the things I always like knowing is what people's favourite gel is. My first lighting job was in a cupboard sorting out gels, like for about 4 days, and that's many years ago, but lots of numbers have always stayed in my head. So I was going to ask you, and you said very early on
Congo
Blue. Is it
I
still
think
your favourite?
No. No. I think I would now go for something maybe quite basic, but it's a colour called Lee 200, and it's a blue colour, and I really like it because when you put it, in particular, what I used to was put it in front of a tungsten light source, and it would be this blue that could look like, at a low lighting level, it might look like nighttime. But then if the light itself was a brighter light, or it was at a higher light level, then the colour changes all over again, and then it could actually turn into something a bit more like a sort of cloudy daylight colour. And so, yeah, that's my favourite.
So something more versatile rather than as dramatic as super dark
the
blue.
super dark with sort of tints of purple
Yeah.
I've moved on from,
I was also going to ask you about how did you balance motherhood with working those kind of hours at the theatre, but then you start to talk about your change in role.
Yeah.
Is that, I mean, I know it is, and I assume it is, but a real barrier for women working?
I think it's difficult. It is, I mean, being a parent in the theatre industry, in particular if you're working on the performances, is really tricky because the performances are at the weekends and in the evenings. So it is difficult, and I think it's changing and it's improving, and it is possible, but yeah, it's still quite tricky.
The National Theatre doesn't have a creche.
No creche,
Not
no,
yet.
no creche, but still very supportive with hours
Yeah.
and flexible and that kind of thing. So it was fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had another question. Have you got some questions?
I have, but you
All right,
go
I'll
ahead.
just keep going with my questions. No, when you're talking about like when you first at university was using sort of like a par can and a gel, like that's a very basic sort of building block for light, and then you've jumped into using these kind of like incredible moving lights with all these thousands of colours. And how do you think designing's different with those two tools? Or do you think it's fundamentally the same?
I think it's exactly the same, in that you still have a profile. You might have a moving light that's a profile, and you'd have a static light that's a profile. And the job that you're trying to do is exactly the same job, but with a moving light, you have the luxury of having far more options. So whereas with your static light, that's it, your job, that's the show. You might be lucky that you can change it at the interval, but otherwise you can't, and that's it. It's doing this one thing in this one colour. With the moving light, it's wonderful because then you have endless options of, as long as you get it in the right place for the show, then it can just do a different thing in every single scene.
I'll let you answer.
Thank you. I was just going to say thank you so much for sharing your story, and as Sharon said, your passion really came across, and I really like the way the day is building, the passion for light and the effect of light on people is really coming across, and that's really fantastic. I wanted to put you on the spot a little bit. You've worked with some amazing lighting designers early on in your career, and sort of who's your current favourite? Who's your inspiration? What's the best thing you've seen recently?
Recently, Monday, I went to see a show in the West End called Good, and it was with David Tennant, And the set was really quite simple. It was just these grey walls and a grey ceiling, and the performers were in the set the entire time. And the lighting designer, Zoe Spur, it was a woman called Zoe Spur who lit it, and she lit it really beautifully and really simply. And because there was a wall behind the performers and a ceiling, her only options were to have a handful of lights front of house in the auditorium to light from the front. And all of the colour was really subtle, no Congo blue, and it was all different sort of shades of white and warm and slight amber, and she just shifted the focus with the performers around the stage really subtly, and I really liked that. It was really lovely.
Excellent, excellent. I think it's obvious again from what you were saying as well, is that light as a storytelling tool is a really powerful thing, and I think we're going to get onto more and more of that this afternoon as well. So that's really good, and that's really interesting. It's all building in totally the right direction. If you were going to give advice to somebody coming into the profession now, what would that be?
That was going to be my next.
I know, that's why I said it. You wrote it down.
The one thing that I would say, and I need to hear this myself sometimes, is just try to ignore the self-doubt and just get on with it and just do it. And if I could eradicate imposter syndrome, that would be fabulous. Because just doing it and just getting on with it and doing it is sort of the hardest bit, but it's the best bit that you can do. Yeah.
Do most of the sort of, younger people coming into sort of being lighting technicians and for the stage, do they have training or education, or are they coming from other backgrounds like yours?
No, there's a lot of really fantastic schools in the UK. We've got some people who work there here today, actually. And yeah, there's some fantastic training courses. Really, really good. We're very, very lucky in the UK.
So, like, where do you mean? Sort of like.
So, for example, we've got a school called Central School for Speech and Drama, and there's a school called RADA, and there's a school called Guildford School for Acting, and Lambda, and I mean, if you just sort of, and so these are the schools, but then on top of that, there's a lot of apprenticeships, like I did, and the National Theatre ran a lot of apprenticeships, and Scottish Opera do apprenticeships, and the Royal Opera House as well, and so you can become an apprentice if, for example, doing a full training course isn't what you want to do. You could become an apprentice and actually learn by doing it at the same time as well.
So they're degrees in like specifically in lighting for stage, or
so the apprenticeships that we did at the National Theatre, I'm not entirely sure what the specific qualification is, but you are attached to a school, so you are doing coursework and handing in coursework alongside of working in the various technical departments of the theatre that you're in.
I think what a lot of people sort of point out is that at the sort of 16 to 18 age group, people aren't aware that all these jobs exist, all the hundreds of jobs exist, and now kind of, say, for touring and concerts, all the digital jobs and the programming jobs that exist. So there's like a real sort of disconnect and lack of information at that age for those youngsters to be able to find those paths. Yeah. So the ones that come across it, like you did, are quite lucky. Does anyone have any questions? No, still shy. Okay, so shall we finish and break?
Break for lunch.
Yep,
absolutely.
Is that okay, Ayrton? Yeah. Okay.
Thank you very
You're
much.
welcome.
Really appreciate that.
We've all seen shows that make us feel unforgettable emotion, exalt us, and awaken our senses. Ayrton has always felt that opera, theatre, and dance have the power to transport us far away, to make us forget space and time. Ayrton's new Wash Luminaire is equipped with an optimized Fresnel lens that raises the standards of elegance and precision. A wash light that in all its subtlety continues a tradition of excellence. A luminaire that will thrill you. Hurricane Wash, just for a thrill. When it comes to wash lights, the Fresnel lens is simply a must. The Ayrton Fresnel optimization system enhances the optical structure when using barn doors, geometric gobos, or ovalization lenses, offering a chance to be free from the usual constraints and operate the wash luminaires with the subtlety they deserve. With Hurricane Wash and its Fresnel optimization system, you will gain up to 10% intensity. Its proprietary optical system delivers a 12:1 zoom ratio and a zoom range of 6.2 degrees at half peak to 75 degrees at 1/10 peak. Control your stage space and create a unique ambiance. Hurricane Wash adopts the complex color mixing system of Hurricane Profile. Its double level of CMY saturation lets you obtain up to 281 trillion colors. A triple variable color temperature corrector allows subtle adjustment from 2,700 to 15,000 Kelvin. Hurricane Wash is available in S, ST, or TC versions that will cover all uses on stage. Their specific features make them unique and exceptional. Choose the right version of Hurricane Wash according to your feeling. For shows that require cooler, metallic white light, the S version offers a record luminous flux of 52,000 lumens, a color temperature of 7,000 Kelvin, and a CRI of 70. Hurricane Wash ST introduces a brand new monochromatic LED source specially developed for studio and theater applications. This source delivers light output of 45,000 lumens and a D65 white point that allows perfect brilliant color reproduction with a CRI greater than 80. We've all seen shows that make us feel unforgettable emotion, exalt us, and awaken our senses. Ayrton has always felt that opera, theater, and dance have the power to transport us far away, to make us forget space and time. Ayrton's new Wash Luminaire is equipped with an optimized Fresnel lens that raises the standards of elegance and precision. A wash light that in all its subtlety continues a tradition of excellence. A luminaire that will thrill you. Hurricane Wash, just for a thrill. When it comes to wash lights, the Fresnel lens is simply a must. The Ayrton Fresnel optimization